right, welcome back to another Huge Family Conversations, Marriage and Family. This week we're going to be diving in a little bit more to repair. Last week we had, really kind of gone into, I'll kind of read some of my notes here. We had narrowed down kind of emotional regulation into some simple and usable kind of skill sets, some habits, some actions that are a little bit more practical. And so it's not just something that's kind of just being talked about. It's actual things that people can work on and to apply. And so we started with naming, which is identifying the emotion that you're feeling, what set it off, and where it shows up in your body. Because once you can name it, once you can actually talk about what it is that's happening internally, then you can start to take steps and actions to govern those things and actually use them kind of effectively in dealings and in relationships and whatnot. And then we moved into kind of emotional flooding, which is that urgent, loud, defensive, all or nothing kind of fight or flight state where conversations don't create clarity, but they actually kind of cause damage. And then we had specifically, with relation to those two things, had talked about kind of two tools, the psychological sigh or using breath to lower the intensity, and then the 20-minute pause with a return so you don't kind of confuse regulation with withdrawal, which you would, and I know, Mom, you had kind of said that pause could also be much longer than that, but those are kind of the two things with regards to naming and flooding, that it's the best things that we could really be doing are slowing down, recognizing what's happening internally, taking a break, breathing. Breathing seems to be the one that's big right now in our home. As Parker's pregnant, it's always like, whoa, 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 let's take some breaths and kind of slow down. But absolutely, that pause is also important. So, um, anything you want to add to that, Mom?
Last week we kind of talked about, asking everyone to kind of check in with themselves. What is that thing that knows that tells you that, oh, I'm maybe flooded? Did you have an experience this week, or do you know that tell in yourself?
Yeah, you have some words listed here that I like. Does it kind of come up is urgency, volume, shutdown, blame? I think, for myself, volume is definitely one of them. I get loud. I think I get big, I think it kind of correlates with blame. I would say if I'm feeling defensive, then I think my volume goes up. If I'm flooding, I think often too, I would say like I don't know if it's urgency, maybe it's urgency, but I feel
Forceful?
hot in my chest. It's
Yep.
like, whoa, I gotta, my heart rate starts to go and different things. And so definitely, and yeah, we actually over the last few days, as we've just had little things come up in conversation between Parker and I have recognized, oh, I'm getting a little bit louder. Oh, I'm starting to feel a little bit hot, and I need to probably take some breaths or take a minute to just kind of reflect and recognize what it is that set me off and such.
Well, and sometimes, as I like your dad and I definitely don't see eye to eye on some things. And so as those moments happen in, conflict situations, there are times where I'll have to stop and go, okay, just I'm not gonna leave necessarily, like I'm not to that point, but just let me think for a second. Let me see if I can get
Mhm.
my prefrontal cortex back online. And sometimes I'll sit there and I'll look out the window and look at the birds or, think, oh, I wonder what it's like weather-wise outside. Like literally letting your brain have this different thing. There's an interesting strategy um, that I stumbled upon years ago, and I was going through my kids were leaving home and all these things, and there was just a lot of grief and a lot of moments to be sad, but also at the same time happy and exciting and joyful and needful. And I stumbled upon this strategy that talked about you can trick your brain into a different emotion by something that you watch. So I started watching comedy videos on YouTube or like the stupid cat dog reels that show up in social
Right.
media. And I it works. My brain tells my body we feel differently now, and I can literally snap myself out of a bad mood by watching something like that. And sometimes it's two or three videos that come across that I'll be able to use to kind of redirect. And it's just an algorithm in your brain, right?
Right.
It's just a loop that you're kind of in. It's called a feedback loop. And so that's another strategy I was thinking about this week that I have used to, okay, give me a second. You do this other thing, not just the breathing, because you're gonna, as you get kids, you start to do a lot of the breathing. Let's calm down, let's take a break, let's go outside. And you're like, oh, like we talked about last week, why don't I do that for myself more often? Why
Right.
do I think I have to kind of punch my way through this to our detriment? So, yep. And that's good that you're kind of paying attention to your body. I think bodies, we neglect to realize they're our first cue that we're in fight or flight. And they do a good job of telling us if we will listen to them.
And I think to your point, I think the topic of today is repair, right? But I think that there's, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, there's levels to that, but I think if we can do some of these strategies that you've given us in the last video, and as we're talking about it now, we don't really get to repair because you can do that preventative work long before you actually damage anything. You do something that that might cause for some repair to need to take place. And so I think that that's something we've all had to repair too many times. And I think doing that kind of precursor work is what helps us to avoid. But obviously, this is still an essential element because it's not like we're never going to hurt something bad enough again that we won't have to. So,
And we do, right? So all relationships, and I'm going to use that general statement, all relationships have periods of derailment, whether that's just someone said something in a tone you didn't like, or and it can be because of you, it can be because of them. The universe doesn't simply just stay smooth.
right,
And so I think those are things to expect in relationships is that you're going to have difficulty. And I don't know, I think it's probably Disney movies or television, something like that, these books that
right.
people read that are fiction that tells you everything has this nice little bow at the end. Um, it's kind of funny because I really love superhero movies, and part of the reason I love superhero movies is it it finishes nice. I know who the good guys are, I know who the bad guys are. And your dad and I had a conversation, gosh, probably 5 years ago, and he was telling me he doesn't really like movies like that because they don't feel real. And I can appreciate the fantasy aspect. I also really like reading about people's stories and seeing them overcome hard things, even though it's not perfect at the end. And so repair, we often think happens at the end. It actually starts right at the beginning. And we do that by being aware of our assumptions, right? And how we react to them. That we talked about storytelling a little bit, and I'm actually going to come back to that in a different thing because I want to kind of pull that apart some more. I think we don't realize quite how much that plays into our life, um, and how much we escalate because of those things, the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell other people about ourselves or themselves or whatever. Um, and so we've got to be careful when we talk about repair and the things associated with that because we like to come into reason, judgment, logic, and you cannot do that in high stress emotion situations. There, there is no place for it. That is where repair enters in, right there. And so if you try to logic your way through a volatile situation, you're going to get punished really quick. Both of you will,
Right.
right? Because words get said like, well, that's not reasonable, or well, you're not being logical, or whatever. Well, try that and watch how fast that blows up in your face, right? And becomes 10 other, like it like almost like multiplies, right? It becomes like a spider that is having babies. It's like, and everything just goes everywhere. That's what I think trying to be super logical. Not to say there isn't a place for that. There absolutely is a place for that. But for me, the logic becomes, all right, let's move into this place of repair, de-escalate the emotion. And so if you have bad feelings and she has bad feelings, how do we move forward? Or them. It could be a work colleague, right? It could be a family member. It could be he or she. It could be literally a room full of people could have bad feelings for you. So how do you move into a different place? And so the question I think we start asking is, all right, my motives, are they good? Are they in good faith? Can I look at this person and want something that's better for them? Maybe. And at this point, I want to say, okay, I'm going to try to understand that person. I'm going to try to reframe them. I'm going to try to think about them in a way I want to be thought of. And that is repair at the beginning of a difficult situation. And so not everyone can move into that place. That is where I think the logic reason can come in on your side, not necessarily telling the other person that they're not being logical or reasonable. But for you to come in as the person who's really trying to have this emotional regulation, this emotional maturity, having some emotional intelligence, maybe, then you would say, all right, I'm going to try to really hard to see this person differently. And that's the most difficult thing to do when you're trying to work through conflict, because ultimately we're all trying to find safety and respect and goodwill from and to the other person. So we often think, if I apologize, I'm admitting that I did everything wrong. Maybe, right? A lot of people refrain from apologizing. If I validate what they think, then I'm giving up power, control, or my way. If we can't agree on the facts, then we can't rebut. And ultimately, that's what keeps the conflict stuck. We stick in that. And so my belief is you can repair the impact of your actions or things that you've said, just and you can disagree on the interpretation of that. For example, if I say something and you go, it sounds like, and then you comment on my tone, my affect. We talked about this a little bit last week. We could dial into that a little bit more. If it's not accusational, usually, right? Like I'm hearing you say that you're irritated because blah, 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 or that you're frustrated, or you feel like because my voice got loud, that is what set you off, that you were sensitive to that. I could say, you're right, my voice did get loud, and I don't want my voice to get loud. So I will pay closer attention to that. You could say that to me in a conversation, and if I'm looking for repair, that would be a really great place for me to insert that. And that's the goodwill I'm talking about, right? If the other person isn't in that place yet, that it's better to take those breaks, revisit the situation later, talk about something else. If that person that you're dealing with isn't wanting to find a place of reconciliation, which you're not there yet, if they just don't even desire that, you're not going to get there. You
I,
you
I
have to bring things down.
yeah, I was gonna say because I'm having this thought too because I think we're gonna I mean I'm gonna backtrack for just a sec is it's like when things are hot I from what I'm gathering a lot of these kind of like clarifying questions are more kind of it's kind of like hovering to see if the stove is hot. It's like, okay, are we in a position to take the repair steps? Because I think as what I'm understanding from what you're saying is repair can happen at any point through the conversation, at any
And
point
should
through
be.
a
And should be.
disagreement. Right. But sometimes it's like, ooh, this feels like it's not like we're not on the same page. I'm gonna just see if maybe we're there yet because and I think that's when we would employ some of those strategies. Is it's like, hey, just so I'm understanding clearly what, and then ask a question, I what I'm hearing is this thing, and then see kind of how the response is. It seems like you're still pretty upset about this, just based on your tone and your body language. That's kind of what I'm reading. Is that, oh, appropriate in seeing kind of what's happening?
And what do you need right now? Right?
Sure,
Like you could, and it's a difficult thing to do. This is emotional intelligence. This is emotional maturity. This is that in its rawest form. I can see that maybe you're still angry about fill in the blank. What do you need right now? Right? And that would be an appeal to, could I hold you? Why don't you just tell me what you've got, what you're feeling right now? And I'm just going to listen. I'm just going to hear you out start to finish. Sometimes words just have to be said because if we start dealing in the details, the other person doesn't get to even finish what they're trying to say.
sure.
And we've all felt unheard or, objected to. I mean, it's like, okay, we're not in front of the judge. Could we
Right.
just, could I just finish 3 sentences? We've all felt mistreated that way, right? And so sometimes we just, it's not about, okay, we're not trying to solve a problem. We're not even trying to get through whatever happened or whatever's happening. Just let me just offer you this little bit to see if we can get to a place we can find some common understanding,
And
right?
to the other side of it too, because my second part is on the other side of it. It's developing that maturity in ourselves to be like, oop, I'm not in a good place. Whether or not they ask the question, whether or not the other person has the emotional intelligence to start doing these things. And I hope everyone will be practicing and trying and making efforts in that. But if I'm not there, oop, you know what? I need to take a minute and just give me 20 minutes. Let's revisit it. I'm feeling a little bit hot. I need to bring it down. This isn't going to be a good position for me to have this conversation. Because at the same time, I think that is, and maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just, that is a form of me not, of repair, but on my end, I'm the one who's having the problem, but I can't, I don't want to cause damage because of what I'm feeling, because of what's going on for me. And so I need some time. Also letting the other person know, hey, I'm not in a good place. Give me a little bit of space, putting them in a position where they can find maybe that sturdy place to, them knowing that it's not a them problem, that it's, I'm going to come back to it. I don't, is that, am I getting that
So
right?
that's ownership, right? You're taking ownership for your emotional state. Now, there's two different ways this could go, and I'm going to illustrate it with the same sentence. Oh, you know what? I am just, I'm really mad right now, and I need to stop talking to you, and I need like 20 minutes to go away, and then we can come talk about it. But I'm really mad at you.
Sure.
Or, okay, there's, you know what? I am really mad right now, and I need 20 minutes to just snap out of this. I need to go just go for a walk real quick because I am just still really angry. Same same thing,
Right.
but the first one felt like what?
You're projecting onto me, you're manipulating me to into feeling bad because of what's going on for you.
Responsible.
Yeah, yes, yep,
Like you have to hold my anger, and you somehow caused that, and you're responsible for it. Even though I'm going, oh, I'm going to go away. So what that feels like to the other person is abandonment,
sure.
and right, like they're responsible for not putting you in that place. Otherwise, you go away from them. Mm-mm. It's responsible in the sense that I'm going to hold my own emotions, and I'm going to say, right, like even if you, like, I'm just really mad. I just need 20 minutes because I got to get this under control. And you might not even know why, right? It might just be a last straw for the week. It might just be it's rubbing up against something else that's unresolved that you guys haven't talked about, or you need to talk about, or you keep talking about that keeps going unresolved. But making sure that your ownership is for your emotions and whatever your behavior is going to be. You're not leaving that person in a way to abandon them in all of their feelings too. You're just taking this figurative step back and going, hold on, I need to get back under emotional regulation here. And I'm not there. And this is going to make it so this doesn't turn into 1,000 baby spiders,
Right.
right?
Which,
So, because nobody
sorry
likes that.
to cut you off, but that
Please.
I'm starting to maybe piece something together. You said don't use words like reason, judgment, logic. Don't say that doesn't, you're not being very logical. And I think because when you first said it, I was like, I'm sure we'll get there, but I'm not really sure why that's because in a man's brain, it's like this isn't logical. This isn't, well, not, I can't, that's general.
Emotions aren't super logical, right?
Right.
Because there's something underneath. We talked about that last week.
And I think that might be part of maybe what some people miss because as we just talked about that the responsibility for someone's emotions is their own.
Yep.
I am responsible, which also makes sense why it using those types of words don't make sense because I would say I use that because someone's trying to make me feel responsible.
Sure.
I wouldn't do this. That's not logical to do. That's not something that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to behave and act and say and do those things because that's not reasonable for me in my brain to behave that way. But to the same, why I shouldn't use that is because it's not my responsibility, anyways. It might be my
Yes.
responsibility to help that person process those things because that's what relationships are is a responsibility to maintaining and helping and I guess
I call
kind
it
of
pruning.
yeah, sure.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
maybe I'm off base on that, but that makes more sense.
Sure.
Those things I think often imply responsibility when the responsibility is always the person who has the emotion.
Right.
And so that makes sense because the person already knows that it's their own problem to deal with, and now it's how do
Maybe.
we, well,
Maybe.
you would hope, right? Yes.
Hmm.
And so by as you're kind of saying, maybe using some of these other strategies, other words, framing it in a different way helps them kind of come maybe grapple with it a little bit quicker than
Yes.
stepping on it and causing the baby spiders to explode. I don't know. Maybe I'm
Yes.
I'm articulating it wrong, but
Well, and just like we are doing right now, right? We're coming to a commonality in how we're willing to use the language that we use and the way we're going to explain something. This is all what you do in relationships. There's just usually a problem adjacent or embedded in it, right?
sure,
And so that's why it's really important to go, okay, reason and logic and judgment are critical, absolutely critical. And so where do they factor in? Well, they factor in how you have planned or choose to proceed in a volatile situation, right? Like, okay, I am going to use my judgment and reason to exit for 15 minutes and take a break and get myself back online
right,
instead of punch my way through this person to get my way. But that's not really what you're doing, but that's what they think you're doing,
sure,
right? Because we're all in ego mass protection at that point, which we're going to talk a little bit about. And so there's this idea that repair is not having to agree with the other person, their beliefs, their even their emotions. You don't have to agree that I feel angry about this, right? But it's a responsibility that we make to a person that we're in a relationship with, that we care about, that we're going to bring our best self and, have goodwill for them. It's the only way I can describe it. That I'm not going to act that because you behaved badly one time, I'm not going to tell myself this story that that's who Andrew is.
sure,
I'm going to use a lot of data from the past based on your behavior, based on my interactions with you, is better informing my decision about this one little situation that might have happened that went bad. And hoping that I can come into it with good skills to make things better for the future. Not even that I'm going to admit I did anything wrong, or that you have to admit that you did anything wrong, but there was a breach, and we care more about us, our relationship, than about whatever that little thing was. So if an apology is necessary, that's not a big deal to me. It is to a lot of people. And I'm sorry means nothing if there's not behavior change. So I'm more curious about behavior change than I'm more interested in someone saying, that's just me. Now, is it nice? It's nice, right? But I don't care that much about it. I care more about, okay, we agree that this is something that happened and this is what's going to be different or better in the future, right? So that's where care is about responsibility. I disagree with your version. I can still own what I did, even if it was small, and we can agree what's going to happen different. That's the maturity that happens, um, instead of debating about the details, right?
Right.
Because I could sit here and be like, but you did this, and that's why I did this, and you were like, well, you did this, and it just zigzags back and forth, and is exhausting. So there's a four-step kind of repair approach that I wanted to kind of talk about. So let's say you are sitting with your wife and there's been a breach, like, right, there's a disconnect, and you sit down and one of you says, look, I don't know exactly what happened to cause this argument, right? This is post everyone's back online,
Hmm.
but I want us both to come away from this knowing that we're okay, that we're on the same team, that no one's against, that the problem is something you and I face together. The problem is not you or me. And what that does is that lowers threat, right? So you name a shared goal. That could be we're on the same team. I want to understand why this was so hurtful for you. I want to make a plan for the finances that we're fighting about, right? Like I want us to find agreement. And even if we have different, and it doesn't always have to be alignment. Like I could have a different way that I want to do something than you do, but that we're both like, okay, we want to come together and work it out, right?
Right.
There's this turning toward is what John Gottman calls it. Turning towards your partner and starting to make bids for affection for each other. Then number two is you own your part of whatever the breach was. Babe, I raised my voice. And I know that's something I'm working on. And I'm going to continue to work on that. And I am so sorry that I did that. I know that upsets you. I know that scares you. I'm working on it. That's, I mean, you already know that about yourself,
Right.
right? What's the harm in saying that? Other than, well, yeah, if you hadn't raised your voice, then I wouldn't have done that. That could be true, but we have a lot of data that maybe informs that differently.
Right.
I don't know. And it doesn't really matter, right? If you're trying to stack up the cards against the other person, well, that's the problem. But if you're like, if that person goes, okay, thank you for apologizing, thank you for taking this accountability for that. And then the natural response would be, I know when I know talking about finances is hard, or I know talking about, setting up the house is difficult, whatever that thing is. At that point, you have to decide how are we going to move forward next. So you own your part. You, the other person doesn't have to own the part for repair to be happening, right? You named it, you named the common goal. Now you're talking about your part, and then you have to go, okay, let's validate the impact. I know when I raise my voice that you feel unheard. I get bigger than you to shut you down, whatever that is, right? I don't know. That's for myself, something that I tend to do. Let's see. Like one of my patterns is um, often like if there's a conflict, I just kind of go like, whatever, like, well, that's you, that's your thing, and I just whatever. right? And so that can make the other person feel very, very like, okay, you see that's you're dismissing it or you disagree with it or whatever, right? So for me, I have to validate that my impact of just maybe avoiding the thing, um, that's something that I think is a pattern that I I don't like conflict. And so, and I know that confrontation can be done without conflict. It's just not often,
Sure.
right? So if someone sits down with me and says, okay, I need to talk about this hard thing, I really appreciate that owning at the beginning because then I go, okay, and maybe right then's not a good time for me. Like I have the opportunity to say that. You know what? Could we talk about this tomorrow? I have 5 things I need to get done, and I'm just not in a place where I can give this emotional like attention to this. And I consensus this is important to you, right? And so that would be something I would try and do if it was going to be a hard conversation. If I did have time, then I would be like, okay, I'm just going to listen, right? I'm going to validate that in the past, maybe I I speed things up too fast or whatever. And so I'm going to pay attention to making sure the person understands that I understand. That's really important in a conversation. So when we talk about validating impact, I want to I want them to know that I'm willing to own how I respond, how I act in a situation. And so when that's conflict oriented, like after a rupture, I have a tendency when I'm not heard to get loud, to maybe say things that I've kept really deep that should be talked about, that I've avoided saying, but then they come out in a hard conversation, like when we're fighting. And that's not fair. That feels probably like borderline disrespectful, right? Like, why are you saying that now just to hurt me? Right. Exactly. That would be true. And so that's why I think it's really important to understand the impact that you have with the way you respond when there's difficulty. Because it causes this other that's why I say the spider babies, right? It causes these other things that happen if you're not paying attention to your own impact.
Right.
So I don't know if you had anything to say, if I just was talking too much still.
No, that's okay. Yeah, all of it, it's kind of all contingent upon you got to be at a good place, right? Because at any one of these points, even to the same, if you name it, right, someone could get hot again if try to own your part and someone digs it in and they start arguing the details. And it really, I think it just kind of keeps coming back to the same, like, you got to be mature enough to want to move forward. But I think there's something, and I'm you had kind of said earlier that caught my attention. You said that apologies don't really do it for you. And I remember I read a book, The Five Apology Languages, I believe by I think it's Ken Blanchard. I think he's the one who wrote the Five Love Languages. And I remember he talked about that a lot because at the beginning of our marriage, I was like, anytime we argue, I walk away hotter than I did starting it. And I read that book and I went, it's because I don't care about an apology. I care more about you committing to being better and then showing me that that's what's actually going to happen. And I think that's something to remember throughout this whole thing is uh, people need to recognize that their spouse or the person on the other end you might need to go through a series of different types of apologies in order to actually be be done. It might be an I'm sorry. It might be a I'm going to work to not do that again. It might be a next time I start to feel hot, I'm going to just communicate and step away and then come back. It might be what can I do to make that better? Those are all different strategies that different people you might say, what can I do to make that better? And the other person says, well, why don't you just apologize? And then you just go back. Oh, well, I'm sorry. Okay. That's like the different things I think are also recognizing that. that person is probably going to need an apology different than yourself, just because
Sure.
everybody, even just our own personalities are so different and whatnot. Like Parker needs an apology. I need a commitment to change and then show me that you're going to, kind of more like what you said, Mom. And I
Mhm.
think that's also really important, and not something to the same point. Why don't be critical of that person needing something different just because they are different. It might not be logical to you, but we're not, again, to that point. I'm not trying to repair or make the other person see logic. I'm just
Yes.
trying to make the situation better so that we can move on, because we are a team. We have the same goal. We have the same, outlook for our life. So I guess that's kind of my thought on that. But
It's great. And part of it, what you're saying is it's right in line with this because ultimately when we sit down with the other person, that we're talking to, we're trying to avoid a recreation of whatever rupture had happened. Ultimately, I think, right? I don't like having the same problem over and over and over with someone. Eventually, that just takes up too much emotional time and energy. And then I just want to be, that's how I am.
yeah,
I don't want to keep doing that. I don't want to keep pushing the same horse through 2 feet of mud. Eventually, I'm just
gonna sell the
going to,
horse. Yep.
eventually that relationship just doesn't work for me, right? That's like way, I don't want to do that. That's just how I, so when we talk about apologies, like giving an apology, I think it's important for whoever's listening to just kind of self-reflect on what an apology really is intended to do. And man, it's so easy to say, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
and do nothing.
Right.
So easy to not have to change, right? And so that's why this process of really understanding that, number one, I have to name where we're at and understand that. I have to own my part. I need to validate the impact of my behavior, right? I have to really understand that when I do A, that puts us at G because I know that person, I care about that person, and we can agree like if if I'm in a conversation with someone and they get up and storm out, that is upsetting for me. Then I'm like, what do I do now? Right? That ends up causing another problem
Right.
later because then I don't trust that person to sit down and have another conversation with them again. I might have been being really vulnerable and they just stormed out. I don't I don't want to do that, right? And like to your point, every person's different. And so you sit down and you get to know that person that you're talking to. And then that last thing, that process of going forward kind of leads us into this last little bit of this, which is, committing, okay, we had the rupture, we're trying to find some common ground. And literally the next part would be the ownership, the understanding, right? The the repair that we're going to do that becomes at the end. So, for example, we're sitting here going, I don't, we get through the conversation, we have we talk about it. Impact-based repair looks something like this. We don't see every detail the same, but I do see that maybe my tone landed wrong or the words that I used affected you. And next time I'm going to like, right? If someone, for example, if you might have said to me, well, you're just not being logical, I would be like, okay, well,
I don't feel
I,
logical.
I might be like, I think it's very logical to me
Right.
what I'm saying. I, okay, th- what am I supposed to say to that? I'm not going to sit here and
Right.
debate with you on whether or not I'm being logical. That's an exercise in futility. Yeah, I'm just going to be like, okay. But if we go through and okay, we didn't agree on what happened, and one of us didn't feel like it was safe, right? We were feeling vulnerable. But I'm going to commit to doing better in the future, and processing our relationship in a way that helps us, you know, not have this problem for the future. That to me, I'll take 0 minutes for a second or something to um, probably at the bottom of my notes.
What are you missing on?
Just it's somewhere else that I don't think I added it in.
Because we're talking about so the impact-based repair,
Okay, so yes, so part of what happens in repair is there has to be like a truth that we can both agree to, right?
right,
And then there has to be trust that's built as we're talking, that it's like, okay, you understand that this affects me like this. I understand that what I do affects you like that. And then that creates this safety between us for the future. And that is what then builds an emotional connection so we can then solve wherever the problem was that caused the rupture.
right,
So those are where and why. So we talked about where repair fits, which is all the way through the conversation, especially at the beginning. And it also fits at the end. So as we get through understanding the other person, we go, okay, now we have this safe place. We feel connected again. The other person feels like they can be vulnerable with us. And now we can proceed to move through whatever the conflict is without yelling, right? Without the tone
right.
being disrespectful. We can do all of those things in this conversation. And that is where I think the biggest problem happens in when we start talking about like where people kind of go sideways in our conversations when it's intensity because we don't feel that safety and we feel disconnected right there. And
Sure.
so ultimately that is the thing that repair is trying to do. And so one of the things you talked about maturity enough to go forward. How do you determine that? How do you
Normally,
go ahead?
I would say track record is probably I would say if normally in a spouse scenario, it's like, okay, based on previous arguments, we've either made progress or we haven't. And I would say a lot of times if we haven't, then it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to kind of stay where I'm at until I can tell that the other person's actually willing to make the changes that I've, said. You hurt me, you raised your tone and you talked down to me in this way, and you did certain things that are no common in arguments, I would say, or disagreements, and vice versa, of course. But I would say one normally, if someone wants to move forward, they're probably mature enough to recognize this in themselves. At least that would be my opinion. And I would say as those things start to change, then you probably move on to the next thing. At least that would be my the way I would think about it. If I don't see any change, then I know that we're not to a place where we could get to maybe the deeper issues. If I'm still talking about your tone, then I'm probably not going to really tell you maybe the deeper things that actually hurt my feelings so that we could make those processes because you're not mature. You're just going to get angry with me again and you're just going to yell at me
Right,
again and you're going to whatever it is. So
right. And see, that's where it gets so interesting. Like when you talk about, not you, but like people talk about having this emotional maturity and intelligence, is it really is a situation of having to keep that's where like we're not going to talk about it, but that's like where forgiveness comes in, right? And that's where having good faith for the other person comes in. And I think for myself, one of the best strategies that I was able to come across, I mentioned it earlier, was telling the person ahead of time that I need to have a hard conversation.
mm,
Like if I was to call you and be like, hey bud, I need to talk to you about some stuff that's going on. I don't know how it's going to go. I, I honestly, I don't want it to be something that hurts your feelings. I'm a little worried it might be really heavy. Could you let me know when you have some time and we could talk together? And then when you maybe came over or I came over or whatever, right? And I'd be like, this is what I'm talking about, like naming the shared goal. Will you just stay with me for a second? I need like 5 minutes to kind of explain to you what this is. I have a tendency to talk too fast. I have a tendency to kind of like speed up when I'm feeling anxious. If I start doing those things, will you just kind of let me know? This is really important to me and really praying for this as well. Because you matter more to me than I can even express to you. And your feelings would be what?
Truthfully, I would be worried. That would be my thing. It would be like, well, what the heck? And I think part of it though is there are very few people that I would have that conversation with because most people aren't worth the time, aren't worth the emotional energy to expend in having that. That would be my wife, potentially my kids, and maybe my parents. Outside of that, I don't think I would be having that specific type of scenario, mostly because for me, I don't know that I would find it beneficial based on my own
Sure,
need to repair relationships. I would just move on and probably whatever at that point.
sure.
But if someone were to sit me down and say that, I'd be like, oh my gosh, something must be devastating.
Well, and it could be, not even a situation like I could be a coworker and be like, Andrew, there's just this thing going on and I just need to talk to someone. I'm having a really hard time. And gosh, I'm worried, right? Like, but for someone to come into it going, I feel the weight of this. I know that this is hard.
Sure,
And to kind of name that and not treat it lightly, not be flippant about it, be really mindful that you're asking someone to maybe do something that they might not have capacity for.
sure,
They really might not. And that's not a them problem. That's just where they're at. So when you talk about maturity, that's how I look at it, right? So when I think of the people that I share my life with, I do have to kind of go, okay, is this person someone that can carry the weight of my needs in a relationship? I don't see myself like I can be super easy and light and fluffy and but that's just one piece of me.
right,
That's not my authentic deep self. That's just my surface self that people see. And there's a lot of people who are happy to get that much from me or that I'm happy to give to, right?
sure.
But there aren't a ton of people that I really give the heavy weight to. And so to me, that is what emotional maturity is. Is someone able to have a hard conversation with me? Am I able to have a hard conversation with them and feel like I come out of that better, stronger, or they have more, you know, weight from me? I have a friend who she's got a kid who's going through some rough stuff and she was like, "Can we go to dinner?" Sure. So we went and she was telling me all this really heavy stuff and she looked at me and she's like, "This is really hard." And I was like, "It's okay." She's like, "I feel like I'm just dumping on you." And I was like, "That's okay too. I don't I can lift heavy stuff. It doesn't that doesn't upset me. I can hear that you're having all these problems and I can hold space for your anger and frustration and overwhelm and sadness. And that doesn't have to impact me." Even, people who I have shared heavy things with, that is what I'm looking for. That is, I'm looking for them to be able to have that capacity. So to me, that is what emotional maturity is. Um, and
Would
I really,
go ahead.
I want them to be able to say, this is too much.
I was going to add because I think, well, I'm going to ask the question. On the other side of it, some people I think are unwise in their sharing of their emotions and such. And that
Absolutely.
would, in the same sense, show lack of emotional maturity, right? If I'm constantly dumping on everybody and everybody knows my problems and everybody has all of my stuff, that is a lack of emotional maturity because you're expecting everybody to pick up all your crap, all your baggage. Would you, or I guess, how would
Yep.
you?
So I call that swimming in deep waters and constantly being like, I'll give you an example. I was a relief society president, and we had this sister in the ward who I would say she was always swimming out into the deep water, and we were constantly sending a life support for her. And even when she wasn't in deep water, she thought she was drowning. And I was like, just put your feet down and stand up.
Sure,
Like some people live like that, right? There's a second fold to that where I think some people's identity are their problems. I think that's something to be mindful of, right? When you talk about whys, some people, their trauma is their costume. That's what they
right,
have on all the time.
right.
That's not who I think they really are. I think that's the character they play in their own play. And so I think those are all things to be mindful of when you talk about people that you're willing to share heavy things with. Um, yeah, I honestly, I think whether we realize it or not, I know women need women and men need men. And sadly, we don't have as much of that in the world that we live in today. And that makes me sad because, first of all, I feel like men don't really have a place for their emotions. That worries me a lot because I have three sons. And like, who do you tell that you maybe think you're a failure when you're really not? That you have these feelings that keep looping. And so, or things that you're worried about, right? Like, who do you talk to? That worries me a lot because I think society has relegated men into believing they're not supposed to have feelings. I think that's absolutely wrong.
And
I think,
and I would argue on the other end, or you have the opposite, where you have
yep,
men that have no backbone and are not willing to stand on anything,
yep,
and you
yep,
can't trust them for to do anything worthwhile and
yep,
good. And
yep. My dad said once that men used to have a campfire,
true,
you know? And there's something about that. I realized that as you guys got older and dad would be like, I need to take him camping, I need to take him on boys trips. And yeah, that's really good for men. I think it's really, with the caveat they come home better, you know? Just like I, same coin. Girls don't always need girls' weekends,
right.
especially if they come back and hate their husbands. I think girls should have opportunities where they're with other women that are like-minded and stuff. That's technically what Relief Society and research should be. I don't know that it is, you know? And so back to kind of the point of what conversation is like these deep feelings that people have, the skill sets of taking emotional ownership, it's hard to learn that with just one person, your spouse.
Right.
That's why it's kind of good to broaden it a little bit. So not that I'm challenging your circle, but maybe think that there could be other people throughout your life that help nurture just kind of your skill set, you know?
I don't even if you were challenging it, I wouldn't think that that's a bad thing. I think that's especially a lot in what Parker and I do in business. It's like you. You are a product of the people you spend time with. And if you're spending
Yes.
time with people who don't have
Yes.
skills, who don't have these things that we're talking about, then what are you becoming? What are you
Yeah.
perpetuating in your life? I totally,
Agreed.
and I would love to talk more about that psychology of men need men and women need women, because I think
Mhm.
that's so, even just as we talk, almost every time we talk, the right now it seems like there's some counterpoint. It's like you say something, I'm like, whoa, 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 that's not at all how I think. And you kind of come back and talk about you recognize that. And I think that's something
Mhm.
so foundational. And I think we're, as we've talked more about it just over the years, we're designed to be that way intentionally.
Mhm.
And yet there are better ways to do things. It's not that what we are doing and what has been done is the best, but there should be a pursuit of, yeah, I shouldn't necessarily just spend all my time with my wife. In fact, this morning Parker was talking about something. I was like, okay, you need to go talk to somebody else, because this is girl talk, and I'm not a girl, and I will
Huh.
happily process things with you, but you're starting to get into a realm that's like, "Ugh," I'm not uncomfortable, but it's like I don't
It's
want
out
to
of your
spend,
depths, right?
yeah, like I don't have
I,
much to contribute, and I don't want to even try. And so,
yep. And back to your point that I think you're summarizing right now. It's so I'm gonna comment on it
mhm,
without specifying it. There's so much that we've lost because we're not raised in this small village anymore
yeah,
that gave us so much good and bad.
yeah,
Um, People know less your business, but that can be bad too, right? Um, I'd never want someone like, Dad and I go to these hundreds conventions and stuff, and I look around the room and it's always surprising. People you think are the most put together are probably in some ways the least put together, and vice versa.
sure,
Um, the guy with mud on his boots probably has more money than anyone in the room. Um, and I don't care about money in that way, right?
yeah,
Like
right.
status, power, status, money, that doesn't matter.
But
But
the
it's just
irony,
interesting. Yeah, like you just people's perception. Your perception is often not, it's not correct. And so, and I know that because of my own life. And so people will be like, "Oh, you are so put together." I'm like, "You have no idea. This is all I had left in my closet, so I had to wear it because the laundry is not done." Right? So just different. But this idea that what we think about the world that we live in is often there's so much more nuance that we've missed. And that's what I'm coming to in my own life is I used to think it was like maybe two or three options. And I'm starting to see maybe there's 10. And the history has been lost on the fact that there are way more ways to get things done. There's way more innovation that we have decided to get rid of because we wanted Occam's razor, which is the path of least resistance, instead of exploring more of the interesting ways of coming to the same conclusion. And so that's where I think in our society today, time is such a minimum. And so we've said, okay, here are the people I'm going to prioritize very, very specifically. And by doing that, we lose some of I feel that way too, like my situation, just in a religious sense. I I wish our church had at this point in time more interaction than we do. And so Relief Society has kind of lost its meaning. It used to be a place that women really came and provided relief and support and compassion and genuine humanitarian aid and things like that. And now it's just girls' nights. And it kind of makes me sad. I see the same thing in what Elders Quorum used to be. When I was growing up, Elders Quorums would build churches, they helped people repair roofs, they did things like helped, widows repair a deck or do her, I mean, just like crazy stuff. And
right?
now we've just lost that sense of community. Um, and that makes me kind of sad. And so it takes me back then to relationships and what makes relationships important. And the important part of relationships is finding connection.
Yeah.
And connection is had when we really understand ourselves so we can then value the complementary things in the other people around us, which I hope start at family and then kind of expand out from there, you know? So that's, you had made the comment. Um, what did I write down? I don't know. I have a lot of notes. So
Well,
I can,
and I think we've kind of deviated from repair a little bit, but I think it still ties in pretty well where the connection is important. But I mean, we are we have had a great conversation. Is there anything you want to kind of say in closing, and we can absolutely kind of pick up continue as we kind of continue forward. Anything you want to kind of say to wrap us up?
I'm just gonna summarize. Most people think repair is like a sentence, like, I'm sorry. Real repair is a process and it takes time. And so ruptures don't take time. Ruptures are the tearing down of the thing.
Right,
And it takes way less time to break something than it does to build it. We have where we're living right now, we had a building that exploded.
right,
And to watch the process of rebuilding, because I remember the process of watching it be built, and it literally blew up in a night, and then they had it demoed in not even a day. It was less than
right.
a couple hours. And watching the process of that get rebuilt kind of reminds me of this in relationships. And so the repair is the process that we have to give time to, which is owning it, understanding it, the other person and ourselves and the situation, restoring if needed, right? Like showing, okay, I said I was going to do this and I'm going to keep doing this. The other thing I was going to say is um, the checking in on the other person about whatever was ruptured. You know, in this building, I have no doubt they have a property manager who's saying, okay, when's it going to be done? When are the framers done? Okay, framers are done. When is the plumbers coming in? When are the electricians? And relationships should have those same kind of check-ins. So this happened a month ago. How are we doing since then, right? Like, what are the things you feel like are better? What are the things that you feel like aren't improving? Because we're proving that we're changing by our actions. And so if any of those things come missing, more conflict is going to get recreated. It's just going to keep happening. And if you're newly married, you don't know. If
Yeah.
you've been married a while, you start to see the same patterns come in, right? And so we all start to go, why can't we fix that? And that's the reason, because the repair is not getting done correctly. We keep apologizing, we keep saying certain things, but there's really no change. So to me, I hope that's the big takeaway everyone has is starting to reflect, okay, how do I approach fixing, repairing, healing when there's problems or conflicts, or disagreements? And how consistent am I in my, what am I doing to show that I really am willing to, you know, become what I say that I am? Because that's one of the big things as we are in arguments is we start to say, no, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy. I'm right, you're wrong. Or if you didn't do this, then I wouldn't do this. And I want to get rid of all of those things and come back to no, if you really want your relationship to improve, you have to consider that you have to be the one to make the changes. And that's the repair ultimately. So that's a long conclusion.
No, that's great. I think this is the last few weeks have been a great framework, I think, for I'm sure things to come that we can reference back to and continue to kind of revisit as we go. But I think that's great. Until next week.
Okay, thanks, bud.
Mhm.